Okay, welcome everybody, and thank you for being here at the Friday before Thanksgiving at the Informatics Institute Friday PowerTalks series. Some of you may have just come back from the AMIA conference in New Orleans, including Dr. Reich and myself, and I saw you there. That was good. It was a wonderful time there. I'm very happy to introduce today's talk, and you spoke about the topic at AMIA as well. So Dr. Christian Reich is co-founder and principal investigator of the Observational Health and Data Sciences and Informatics Initiative, or Odyssey, and there are all kinds of interesting puns and play on words having to do with Greek mythology, which is great. He has over 15 years of experience in life science research and medicine. He has completed his university and medical studies at University of Lübeck, and then he has been involved with multiple informatics consortia and efforts, including the Human Genome Project. And he's also been in industry with the biotech industry and has done consulting. But his claim to fame is the brains behind Odyssey, and goes out and promotes that. And he's also has a faculty appointment at Northeastern University. And the title of his talk, Odyssey's Odyssey. There you go for puns. How does an open source, open science community get to grow and make an impact? Dr. Reich.
Thank you very much. Thanks for inviting me. Thanks for having me. Thanks for bringing people together, your friends and colleagues. Amy and I met at the I2B2 conference. And so Odyssey, from that perspective, I gave an introduction into Odyssey to the I2B2 people there as well. We agree, and we actually have agreed for a while, it just hasn't happened, that we should do much more interaction and to bring things together and help each other and learn from each other and those type of things. So if you're familiar with I2B2, this will be familiar and it will be different. The Odyssey has probably its own little world there, but that's what I want to talk to you today about. Feel free to jump in. I have no idea who you are and what you do and what you know and what you don't know, and cut me short if it's already known, or if you don't need to know this, or ask more in-depth question when it's something I'm using jargon I don't even notice anymore. That's what happens when you do this. When you do this a lot. So Odyssey and OMOP, both of these words are often used together. And first thing I want to essentially clarify what these words that start with an O mean, and where they're coming from, and why they exist, and how they came about. Okay. So OMOP, which stands for Observational Medical Outcomes Partnership, is a project or an initiative that no longer exists, and it still does. So I'll explain how that's possible. But first I'm going to talk about how it all came together first and what happened. And so what happened is the following. It's a FDA thing. The FDA does regulatory actions on drugs that are on the market. So if you want to put a market on a drug, you have to, do all the studies in animal and, pre-clinical and animal and clinical studies, submit this to the FDA, prove the stuff is safe and efficacious, and then you get marketing approval so you can start selling it and claiming what it does. And then that's going on. And then sometimes stuff comes up. And there are side effects of drugs that become known only after the fact, after they're on the market. And, that happened on average once a year over decades, many decades, roughly. And then the FDA does either one of two things. Either it changes the label, the little package insert that you get, or you can pull down from the internet, and says, oh, there's a big problem here, and we warn you, if you have this and this problem, then the drug shouldn't take the drug, or should take the drug with precaution, or with lots of water or orange juice. Or if it's a bad side effect that makes the drug no longer useful for human consumption, they take it off. That's called a regulatory action. To drugs which otherwise don't have to do anything with the FDA anymore. They're done, right? They're on the market. Used to happen occasionally, and then it jumped up, and it's probably jumped up even more today. I have to update this slide at some point. And why is that so? It happens because it's now much easier. There are these large databases, so you can study drugs and you can find things. Also, what the regulators put in place are spontaneous reporting mechanism that people will actually send, or companies or doctors or patients send in side effect reports to the FDA, and they treat them statistically. So it's not like, you know, you write a report and then the drug goes off the market. They need to see a certain amount of disproportionality, you know, to what would be expected. And so this happened a lot. And the biggest one of them was the Vioxx scandal in 2005. That was a drug for osteoarthritis and was a very good painkiller. People used it a lot. Big, you know, it's $2 billion per year revenue or so for the manufacturer Merck. And the scandal was that it had cardiovascular side effect. Actually, lots of people got a heart attack and died. 30,000 a year died of because of Vioxx. It's a big deal. But the scandal wasn't that it had a side effect. You know, drugs do that. The scandal was, of course, that people accused Merck of knowing it and not telling the public when they launched the drug. And so there were like litigation lawsuits forever. And the consequence of that was there was a congressional hearing. And in the congressional hearing, the senators pulled the FDA and then said, hey, FDA, what are you doing? Aren't you checking these drugs? How is it possible that there are like all these heart attacks? And so the FDA said, yes, we do. And, you know, we have clinical trials, and that's how we test the drugs. And then, you know, they asked, so what? Why did this slip through? And they said, because the trials are too short and too small. They are too short because sometimes it takes a while for a side effect to develop. And too short because if the side effect isn't that common, or there's a large background rate, you know, people have heart attacks and die from heart attacks, then it may not be visible in a clinical trial. And so then the question was, so what do we do? And they said, we need to study these drugs when they are on the market based off healthcare data collected during normal standard day-to-day healthcare. Okay. So that's also called observational research. And so you use data that they are not collected for the purpose, but they're already there because, you know, patients go to the doctor and get treated. So Congress did what they're supposed to do, actually, which is pass a law called FDA Amendment Act of 2007. And this is actually a funny act because it almost reads like a project plan. So it says, look, what you're going to do, you're going to build a risk identification and analysis system, and you're going to have at least 25 million patients by July 1, 2010, and at least 100,000 patients by July 1, 2012. Okay. And you'll build the system. So essentially put into the law, this is what you're going to do. And that's what became the Sentinel system. And so, you know, the Bush signed the law. Everybody was happy that now we have a way to identify these risks after the whole time is over, when the pharmaceutical company puts the dossier together and when it's already on the market. And so everybody's happy except the pharmaceutical industry. Okay, so for them it's like, oh my God, you know, they are running studies on our drugs. We run the studies, they don't run the studies. We don't even know what they're doing. They don't even know what data. Should we give them the data? Where are the data coming from? Which data? Do they have to be submitted? What happens? Okay, so essentially one big confusion and, of course, a huge anxiety that suddenly these studies are going to pluck out one drug after the other from the market. And so they have in Washington a trade organization, also known as a lobby group, called Pharma Pharmaceutical Research and Manufacturing Association. And they went to the government and said, we need to talk and we need to somehow agree on how this is done and what our role is and so on. And so the government said, yes, that's what we can do that. And so they put a public-private partnership together between the FDA and the industry. That's the only way the FDA can actually work with the industry. They can't do like research studies or something like that. They have to put a public-private partnership together, and they need to use a foundation. So they used the foundation for the NIH to run this, but the FDA was a scientific lead, and pharma essentially gave people and resources and dollars, lots of dollars. And that's OMOP, Observational Medical Outcomes Partnership. So it's a public-private partnership between the government and pharma. And it's about, medical outcomes, and then, to be studied in an observational setting. So that's OMOP. Nobody knows anymore what OMOP actually means. You can forget it right after the talk as well, because now OMOP is a word. It's even a verb. You can OMOP your data. Have you OMOP your data already? And it became its own thing. But back in the day, in 2008, we're talking 2008, what happened is then they collected a whole lot of committees to define which data, what the governance is, how it's going to work, what methods, what we should expect, what are thresholds for making decisions, all of that. Okay, so they all met in Washington, and they couldn't really come up with something. They couldn't agree, these committees, because things were just not sorted out to that degree as they are now. It wasn't clear how you do this. It wasn't clear. Can you use claims data? Claims data are upcoded. The doctors exaggerate things to make, to get their claim reimbursed. Can you use EHR data? Well, where do we get them from? And what's in there? And there's no quality. And we don't know. The docs scribble whatever they want. How can we trust this? No, we can't. So none of that stuff was at that point a consensus. And so the idea came up, if we can't just agree on things easily, let's figure it out. Let's make an empirical experiment. And the experiment was essentially the following. Let's take a bunch of drugs, 10 drugs, or drug classes in some cases, for which we know the outcomes, we know the side effects. And here are the side effects. And see whether we can reproduce them using certain data and certain methods. So the idea is you have this grid, here are the ACE inhibitors. ACE inhibitors cause angioedema, red. Amphotericin B does not cause angioedema, blue. Antibiotics, we don't know, nobody studied it, we don't know. So red is a side effect, blue is no side effect, white, we don't know. Green is a positive effect, but it's kind of like a negative, it's like a reverse side effect. So this is the grid. Which method, in combination with which database, can find these effects correctly, and also importantly, not find spurious or erroneous combinations, right? Because otherwise the method which always cries murder always wins, but it has to distinguish, separate, discriminate an effect from a non-effect. Okay, so which method can do that with which database? That would be the winner, and that's what we should recommend the government does. Okay, that's OMOP. So it became an experiment, an empirical experiment. Interestingly, nobody had done this before. And so OMOP started and collected a gang of people to actually do this experiment. So I was one of them. I was recruited into this meeting, into this into this project, into this partnership. And then we started doing this. So collecting the drugs and setting up all the methods, you know, they're defined in the literature. But then you have to, when you like parameterize them properly, you end up like the 14 methods turn into, when you permute the parameters, into some like 1,000 scripts. So we needed to run 1,000 scripts in 10 databases on 10 by 10 drug outcome pairs. So this is 100 times 10 times 1,000. So it's about 1 million little mini pharmacoepi studies. Okay, nobody has done that in the past. So, you know, that required quite a lot of machinery and infrastructure to actually just to be able to do this at that scale. So what happened? Experiment was run. There was another experiment run, now experiment number 2. Fewer outcomes, more drugs, so you have a little better statistics. Otherwise, sometimes, you know, these things could be by random. So you have a stronger finding at the end. But really, both, and then actually the whole thing was repeated by a European consortium as well. The outcomes of this was there's a lot of heterogeneity due to the choice of database. So you can find a side effect in one and completely see no effect in another, and sometimes even see negative effect, a protective effect in a third. Okay, so database makes a huge difference. That's a problem, because how do we pick the right database? Analysis choices and parameters make a big difference, like, you know, time at risk and you know, do you exclude the outcome whether it has happened before? Does it have to be the de novo? And, you know, all these different little expectations that how you set up and design these studies. Lots of effect. The outcome definition, where people spend a lot of time getting this right, you know, the diabetes are these codes but not these codes and that type of thing, doesn't have such big effect actually. They're pretty robust. Overall, there is a performance of these tools has an area under the curve of 0.7 in distinguishing positive from negative. So a perfect tool would have an AUC of 1 and would be able to say, you know, the risk that I'm calculating of the negatives of all the negatives is lower than of the positives. So it's a perfect discrimination. And a tool which has no idea what it does and does random guessing has an AUC of 0.5. So 1 is perfect, 0.5 is random. In reality, it's 0.7. Okay. And in this particular experiment, the self-controlled methods perform better than the cohort methods, where you compare different patients. And that was the result of the OMOP experiment. OMOP experiment did only these 10 drugs and 10 outcomes, or the ones which they picked in the experiment number 2, which was the same drugs, just more class members in there. And so everybody was happy. OMOP was over. Okay, was done. That's what it was supposed to do. It was supposed to tell us what works, what doesn't work, what methods you use, what database you use. And it ended in 2013. No more OMOP. And you know, industry was happy. Area under the curve, 0.7 means, yeah, that is a piece of evidence. But really, that's not enough. You know, if we really want to know what's going on, we have to run a study. Study is good. We know how to run studies. We're good. The academic world, they were very upset. They were fuming. Like a bunch of IT guys just does like a big experiment to test how they're doing their work, and they have no idea how to do this. Right. Was a lot of anger. And so, you know, I guess that's what happens when you actually go in and test how how science is being done, and you like double check. You get emotional response right there. So this is what happened. So 2013, we're in 2013. And so the investigators had to go home. And then we thought, I'm one of these guys here, this can't be it. We have a perfect experimental setting. We have an assay, and we have the substrate, we have the questions and the data. And we know it doesn't always work, and sometimes it works even badly and wrongly. Now the work starts. Now we need to debug this problem. Okay, can't just go home and say, well, this is how good these 10 drugs worked. No, we need to fix this. We need to be able to find out the effects of drugs, not just the 10, all of them, not just the drugs, all interventions, surgeries, healthcare settings, anything that we do to treat patients. We should know what works and what doesn't work and how well it works. And this should be part of this should not be the private property of some pharmaceutical companies or the government. Mankind should know this. Okay? This should be open and public. And so Odyssey was formed. That's where Odyssey is coming from. Okay. The Columbia University is the coordinating center, but it is an open source community, which means everything that gets done is in the public internet. Okay. It's international. People outside the US also have side effects of drugs. And pharma funding is not a good idea if you want to have an impact, because people say you found out that finding side effects of drugs doesn't work in the data. Yeah, sure, we can tell. Okay, so no pharma funding, no international, and fully open and public. That's Odyssey. It's essentially a collaborative, and it started literally with 5 guys. No more, no go. And now it is quite different. Okay, it's a huge success and it's global. There are not 10 but 500, over 500 data sources in 49 countries, with almost 1 billion patients in there, and almost 4,000 collaborators also everywhere. Okay, and what's a collaborator? That's a very undefined term. Essentially, all you have to do is to say, hey, I want to do this. I want to participate. And whether you actually do something or just watch, it's fine. There's no obligation for anybody. But we learned that later on that this is how open source communities work. There's a very large community, lots of people who just watch, and a few of them pay attention and contribute, and even fewer of them, like concentric circles. Fewer of them really put work in and do things, but that's fine. That's how it's worked. This is how these things work. It's like something for sociologists to study of why it works and how it works. And the ones who do work, they are very productive too. GitHub is the way where everything goes. And there are lots of 260 repositories in GitHub, and it could be a study, it could be a tool, it could be a method, it could be an experiment. Lots of developers, lots of organizations involved, and so on. And they publish. So this is like the wool ball of people publishing in Odyssey or using Odyssey methods, and how they belong together. And you can see this, there are no like camps or anything like this. This is really one big fat community. Some people are less involved, some people are more involved. But it has created an enormous traction. And we still, anybody can still come. It's not like it's closed, time's up or anything like this. Okay. So what is the success? What are the secret sauces? Why does it work? Even though there's no money, and there's no organization, and there's no structure, and there's no governance committee, and nothing. Okay. There are a bunch of contributing factors. We already talked about open source. We talked about the community. You actually need a community because there's very few organizations who can do, who know medicine and clinical research and epidemiology and statistics and informatics all in one place. Very few. So you need to have a community where people can come together from different organizations. Okay. There's a big deal here. I'm going to talk about it a little later about reproducibility, because certain trust level that we have to achieve. There needs to be scale. I already talked about the OMOP experiment, but the scale actually belongs also to reproducibility. You need to test things out in many different ways until you really believe it. Open science, so everything that gets done gets published. The protocol goes on GitHub before you run the study, and you say exactly what you do, and you don't tweak after the fact to find, p-hacking to find the results within p-value that you publish, and only that one. And then a big deal is standardization. Okay, why is standardization so important? So let's say I have a question: adherence to my drug. Okay, do people take it? Don't take it. It's like an appliance. Okay, an analytical method that you stick into the data, but the data always look different. Every single organization, including yours, represents clinical data differently. Why? I don't have a good answer to that, because it's always the same. People get sick, have some symptoms, go to the doctor, get diagnosed, get treated, get drugs, get better, go home, don't go back, don't get better. It's the same thing all over the world, yet every institution has their own representation of the same thing, which means you can't just plug it in. So what people do today, they wire it up. Okay, they write a SAS script or R script which tests or analyzes whatever you want to know for your representation of the data, for your database only, and then publish. Okay, they still get published, and that way. And we know what happens. We have no idea what's going on, what these guys do. Is it quality? Is it not? People, there are not many people who can do it. They're expensive. No techies can't do any of this stuff. Okay, this is how we generate traditionally the evidence based on observational data. And of course, what we want, oops, animation broke down a little here. What we really want, of course, is, well, you guessed it, because obviously if I use a metaphor then to make the point, and if you have a standard, then it doesn't even occur to you how you could ever live without. So think about electricity. You go to a shop, buy an appliance, you don't even think about that it may or may not work at home. It does, okay? And in fact, it has a huge effect, because if that does work and you can rely on it, you can have more than one product. And this product could be really good. Mortality, safety, prediction, okay? So we call this the OMOP Common Data Model. And that's because it started at OMOP, we never named it. And these are the Odyssey tools. And they could be public, they could be also proprietary, that exists too. There's a whole little cottage industry who builds this for commercial use. And that's all right, no problem with that. But the whole idea is that you standardize this stuff instead of making it up each and every time. And if you have this standardized, then a few good things come out. First, analytics can be remote. You don't need the data anymore in your available to you directly. You can write a query, give me all patients who had 2 COVID vaccines and had afterwards a COVID breakthrough infection. That's a query that you can study, you can count them. and then figure out who they are without having the data, and send that query to Korea, to China, to Israel, whatever. Okay. And they will run it and they will give you the right answer. That's a huge thing, because getting access to data is the main impediment for this whole discipline, as you probably know. And the other one is the data can be behind a firewall. It doesn't matter. You can use data that you will never get access to, no matter what you try. Okay, specialty data, okay? Data in countries which forbid shipping data around, all that. And if you have this, you can have a network, because now somebody has a need. They can reach out to other data partners and say, hey, I have a study on COVID vaccines, on Ozempic. Do you want to participate? I'll send you the code. You just run it. Give me the result back. Done. Okay. Some people may not even have data at all. They're just doing statistical programming. Okay, because it's on a standard. You don't have to have data. It does help to have data to debug, but you don't have to. Okay. And it's Odyssey. Nobody sits here. There's no Christian, no Patrick, no George. Nobody sits here and approves whether or not you're allowed to do this study. There doesn't exist. Anybody can befriend in this network anybody else, and it's just fine. Okay. And a lot of this stuff happens in public on the Odyssey site, and a lot of stuff we don't even know that happens. In fact, there are lots of I keep bumping into people who have data in OMOP, and nobody knows about it. And I say, you have OMOP data. Why don't you come in? And they're saying, oh yeah, we should. Yeah, I guess we should. That's true. Yeah, it's all the time. So they just passively do the OMOP conversion. They passively use the tools and the methods. It's fine. They don't have to, but participating in the network will do a good thing to them, I think. And as adoption, this is the government and academic world. The FDA uses OMOP network. NIH has N3C, National COVID Collaborative, all of us. These are all very large scale, many multi-million-dollar programs. EMA has Darwin, which is essentially the equivalent of Sentinel in the US. That's an OMOP network. IMI, Eden, FP, Pioneer, Harmony. The Koreans essentially have converted the entire country to OMOP. The Chinese Chinese regulator has publicly endorsed and recommended it. But what they actually really are doing then inside the countries is a little obscure, but it's China. I'm sure there are lots of people who are doing it. So there is a lot of adoption in the world, and also by institutional adoptions. Okay, so it's not like this is an underdog things anymore these days. So how does standardization help with the evidence generation? So we talked about the data. We're talking so that what are these analytics that you can do? You can do a whole lot of different things. Treatment pathways, so how are patients actually treated in the world? We don't know this in many cases, what really happens. One thing is in the medical textbooks. The other thing, what actually happens. Doesn't have to jive. You can, find out what's going on. How often are things happening? We don't know this often. We can do comparative design. Give me all patients who have Moderna vaccine versus Pfizer BioNTech vaccine, and you compare which of them has what effect. Self-controlled case studies, which means you look into the same population before and after. Prediction, okay, which patient is going to do badly when they start developing COVID symptoms. That's what this particular study was. And which of them you can send home again saying you're fine. Lots of that happened, of course, but you know, the Odyssey community did huge amount of work on COVID. Now nobody does anything anymore. It's kind of like almost like done, completely gone. And so you need to define these cohorts in order to study these populations, for example, patients on Moderna. And a cohort essentially is a specification to identify a set of people that satisfies one or more criteria for duration of time. That is something that you can standardize too, and then you can reuse these cohort definitions. And so, you know, target and outcome, right? Target is Moderna or Pfizer. Outcome is, I don't know, thrombosis with thrombocytopenia. Okay. And then you throw these at these very different analytics. So it's like a Lego. You have to think of Lego. You can take these things and combine them in different ways to answer different type of questions. The model, this is the OMOP common data model. Don't try to memorize it like with your photographic memory. It's all on the web. Similar to I2B2, really, there are differences. They're really more of a technical nature, and they define whether or not it's better for one use case or the other use case. What OMOP does, what the other ones don't do, I2B2 or they do it to they have ACT, so they do it to a degree. Sentinel or the other mod. There are other networks of similar networks. OMOP is the only one who rigorously also standardizes the content, the coding scheme. You know, everybody in an OMOP database calls Moderna COVID vaccine the exact same identifier, and COVID-19 exact same identifier. So when I write this query, it will work in Korea, right? No matter what they use in the original source data, they use locally. Of course, they use everything different locally. But so it's not only the format that's standardized, it's also the representation of the facts that are standardized. And you know, OMOP steals a lot of the existing standard representations instead of reinventing this big fat wheel there. There's something for cancer. Cancer is different than the other diseases. You need a disease model. It's more than just a diagnosis in cancer. You need the base diagnosis and then all the modifiers, which essentially is things like metastases and grades and stages and lymph nodes and that type of thing. And you need a treatment level because you know you don't just give a drug, you give these cocktails called regimens, and then they go in cycles, and you have lines of treatment. And it's very important which order they are given for defining what's the next one, and so on and so on. So more complicated than the standard model. And then this disease is not like, you know, you have diabetes and you have diabetes and you have diabetes and you have diabetes. You know, the disease comes and goes, it gets hit and then goes into remission and then starts growing again and so on and so on. So there is a big work in cancer here. For the method, for the research, to make it really open science that's reproducible, there are three ideas how to make this happen. One is the so-called legend principles, and legend is because there was one study called Legends, which is a very large-scale study on hypertensive drugs and their outcomes. Huge studies, 8 million patients, and all against all drugs against all outcomes. All drugs against each other, all combinations to all combinations, all drug classes to all drug classes, and then 55 outcomes. And so it's huge. And the idea here is you need to do this comprehensively and not just pick the one where you find a low p-value, which, by the way, happens 5% of the time by chance. Of course, people then do multiple testing and so on, so I know that. But there are a whole lot of principles. Okay, so evidence needs to be generated at large scale to really ask every possible question and answer every possible question. It will have to be disseminated, not just the one that you pick. It will have to be pre-specified analysis, so you don't, after the fact, start tweaking. A lot of people do that. and so on. So there are 10 principles, and nothing is new here. These are all good science principles. They really need to be pushed. The reason is that a lot of research that comes out of observational approaches is spurious, to say the least. Okay, so there's now, for example, a study in JAMA on GLP-1 inhibitor agonists, or Ozempic essentially, and then another one. And it finds in one database, using one comparator, using 4, I don't know where, pulled from which piece, covariates for confounding control, it finds like a ridiculous amount of side effects, like 16 times more pancreatitis and gastroparesis, and it's pathetic. It's a study as bad as it gets. Nothing is pre-specified, nothing is reported. The thing goes into JAMA. Why does it go into JAMA? Because of course, because Ozempic is a big deal right now, right? This hurts us. Studies like this hurt us because they undermine the whole discipline. We must not do that. So we need to have these principles. We need to have proper diagnoses. So we need to diagnose the data that we have, the cohort that we have, the analysis that we have. Do we have equipoise? Do we have a sample size? Do we use negative controls? We need to analyze the methodology that we're using, okay? And then you start a software that you can actually test and check out, okay? I think I already said all this. And you need to permute things, different geographies, different data, not just one database, different timing, not just the one that you think it is, different interventions, different targets and comparators in case of drugs, different methodologies, and throw it at the question of hand, which means you need scale here. You can't do that like if you cobble it together yourself. Okay, let me actually jump over this. And Legend did all this, has a huge amount of different questions that it asked, made sure there is negative controls and calibration of the results. Okay, because the negative controls should actually come out negative. And if there's bias, you have to correct for that. And you have to do diagnosis for each of them. And you have to disseminate everything, not what's happening in the literature today, where only the ones which are mostly the ones which are significant. And so Legend is a huge thing. This is the initial, these are the drugs. These are studies that existed before Legend, and this is what Legend did. So it's like, just like throw the kitchen sink at the problem and really find out what's going on. And it scales. Okay, so you have essentially 12 million different tests, different, drugs and combinations and classes, and negative controls and positive controls in this case even. So overall, you get a huge, and then everything permutes, right? So, you always end up, not all of these exist in the data. So this is what it could have been, 7 billion. This is what it ended up being, 12 million. These are the different databases that participated. So this is a journey, okay? We are not done yet. We invite everybody to participate. Don't expect everything to be perfect, okay? The national highway system is a good idea, even though at the beginning it wasn't that much use. We will know that once it works and it's used by many and there's adoption, it will have a huge effect on what we are doing, what we're trying to do. And again, everybody is invited to come and participate. Any questions? I know I talked like 50 minutes. Or did I put everybody to sleep?
Thanks for the wonderful presentation. I really appreciate you giving the whole history and background, because everybody throws around these terms a lot, and sometimes I don't even get them straight, and I'm in this space that, even though you said OMOP doesn't exist anymore officially, but we still refer to the legacy work that came out of it. I guess it's kind of honoring that, but it's just good to know that, because you hear people saying, "Oh, OMOP is dead," and you think, well, but I still keep hearing it, so it's just good to get that. The only okay, good. Someone did not put someone to sleep. Also, I guess one comment, which is kind of trivial, is that your slide with all the iron and all the plugs, having the same plug. We all know the problem of interoperability. Well, there's always room to improve things, because I did notice that all those plugs, even though it's the same plug, it wasn't grounded. So I don't know if that's something that'll be addressed in the future. Anybody have any questions or comments? This is great, and we do use this at UAB, because at least we're for many different things, but we're an all of us site, and a lot of these different a lot of them use this model and these tools, and so we are a site. And I really appreciate this too, because otherwise you just have chaos. And I think I didn't know that it was like created by kind of like through the sponsorship of pharma. I think that's very interesting. Any other questions or comments, everyone? Oh, can you comment on level of acceptance and adoption of the standards? Are there any issues?
Well, I kind of showed you, right? There's lots of people who are doing it, and the 500 are the ones who say they're doing it, and there's probably another, I don't know how many, who haven't popped up. So lots of people who are doing it. There are also people who are cautious, and they're saying, I don't know. I have my data, I know what I'm doing, and if I convert it, who knows what it does to my to the quality of the data and those type of things. So yes, so this is it's still science. Your tire here can blow. Of course, we all know this. We understand that, but there's a community, and the community will help actually. And there's a forum. It's online, forums.odyssey.org, forums plural.odyssey.org, and it's very active, and people ask questions and other people answer, and then debates happening. So I think, but if the government does it, and essentially the entire every pharmaceutical company has a program, and there are these government-run large networks. I don't know what else you need, right? So it's kind of like no longer the question, should we do it or not? It is an established solution now. Doesn't mean that everything's perfect, and that there's no work needed. There is, okay? But if you do decide that you want to actually participate in research like this at scale and at quality and so on, that's a very good place to come. But again, since it's open and free, I may sound like like a salesman, but I'm not selling anything. I'm not making any money. Nobody gets paid. There are two employees. One is a project manager type, and the other one is a PR who runs the website and puts things into LinkedIn and that type of thing. And the woman also organizes the symposia. There's a symposium every year. There just was one last month, and where people come together. So that's it is an appeal that is completely without having any personal gain or anything like that. It's a lot of fun. There also people are also nice. The thing is, when you have a community where there's no money, that has a filter effect. Okay, lots of people who just want to come there for the money, and they want to be in a committee and they want to be important. They don't come because they can't, and plus there's nothing for them to do. So the community is somewhat geeky and academic in their approach of how to do things and how they talk to each other. But that makes it also very nice and very friendly. So it's a good crowd. I2B2 was the same thing when as far as I know them and when I went there. But of course, Odyssey is wider. It also has a wider use case and wider range. So you will definitely find somebody who you can do business with.
Any final comments or questions? We have 5 minutes left, but I know probably everyone's eager to get started with the holiday weekend. So, well, if not, then you can go to the website, get involved. I have Dr. Reich's contact info. I think you can find him on the internet and through the Odyssey organization website. Thank you very much for this wonderful presentation. That because even though some of us may not think about these things that much, but these are widely used and are supporting a lot of large collaborative research efforts, especially given the use of everybody's using the same standard, which is really important, that everybody's using the same, like model and terminology, and so that like those plugs. Yeah, and I hope that that we continue to increase adoption, get involved. Like I said, it's a nice crowd. The geeky, nerdy thing, that's a positive. I consider that a positive. So thank you for the presentation. Thank you all for attending, and I hope you can get involved and know that these are these underlying infrastructures that can help your research. And I hope everybody has a happy Thanksgiving, and see you at the next Power Talk. Bye.
Thanks, everybody.